as Mark introduced, I'm Mark Turner. I'm currently director of a consultancy called Emsity. And since 2018, I've been working with Safran to help them develop the Safran risk management tool, which Hazel and Georgie were telling you about earlier. So one of the things I really want to be able to show in my presentation is how going beyond those spreadsheets, which other companies have been using up until this time, really can enhance and benefit your organization and start driving the levels of maturity that you need to be able to return good value and good return on your investment in these tools, simply because whilst spreadsheets are fantastic, they've got limitations. And really that's what I want to explain and describe now. So without further ado, hopefully this will work. There we go. So who doesn't love a good spreadsheet? I think that's a fundamental for anybody who works in our line of work, that we've grown up with the idea that spreadsheets are something which you can use on a real regular and day-to-day basis. And they are brilliant. And I'm a real spreadsheet nerd. But spreadsheets have got real key benefits in certain areas. Namely, they're fantastic for working up new ideas, for trying out experiments and working out some algorithms to see what can benefit and what can be better. And I love, whenever even I do work with the stuff in Safran Risk Manager, I always work up my initial thoughts using a spreadsheet to determine whether or not my assumptions and the expectations are achievable and accurate with the technologies which are available. So does it work for me as an individual for trying new ideas? They're also fantastic for working in unique situations where you need to be able to adapt and modify your expectations as to what you're trying to achieve on the fly. And somebody who is adept at using Excel spreadsheets can usually knock up a quick spreadsheet to solve a simple problem. Okay, and that's great when you're talking about unique situations. But obviously, when you're looking at risk management, you're not talking generally about unique situations, you're talking about general situations across an organization. So sometimes there's a bit of a conflict there between what's unique and what you need to actually manage an organization. And they're also fantastic if you're doing it as an individual, namely, if you're not relying on somebody else's work, somebody else's detailed macros or calculations and formula, yeah, you can know and modify and change exactly what you've created yourself, and not being reliant on the weaknesses, the mistakes and the errors which may have been incurred by the person who originally designed it, who may or may not even be in your organization, and you might not be able to ask them for their advice. So that for me is the real joy and the benefits of using a spreadsheet. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Mark to put up the poll. And the poll is really just a simple question to find out how many of you actually regularly use spreadsheets to manage your risk registers.
Okay, Mark, you can't see it, but the questions come up for the audience, so they're starting to reply. I'll read it to you because I know you can't read it. Mark Turner asks, do you regularly use a spreadsheet to manage a project risk register? And the audience has a yes, no, or not sure option, and they can only pick one. So yes, I'm just checking. The percentages do equal 100%. People are getting super quick. Okay, very quick. I'm going to close the poll now because it's not moved. Yep, perfect. Nice and simple. 75% yes, they do use a spreadsheet. 25% no. Very easy. Over to you, Mark.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mark. Thank you for that. That really bears out my personal experience. You know, as I said, I love a spreadsheet. My favorite spreadsheet, which I created a few years ago, actually was a Monte Carlo engine of my own design, which would create 4,000 iterations of a model and output a Monte Carlo histogram with an S-curve. And I integrated that into a risk register. But an Excel risk register, even as sophisticated with one with a built-in Monte Carlo engine, still has significant limitations. Okay, and I knew that if I wanted to do better in my risk management performance, then I needed to move beyond those Excel spreadsheets which I'd created. Simply because some of the limitations which we have on Excel spreadsheets for risk registers is such things as how many columns of data can you fit in? I was actually working on a risk register once, 150 columns of data, which included data and calculated formulas. And with that, they're hard to enter the data into. You need to know which column you're entering the data into. There's no data entry control or validation over what you're putting into that. And it may well be that somebody else is entering data in, which is in an unauthorized way. The other trouble with data in a register is it's difficult to read the results. You can't see instantaneously the benefits of the data that you're changing. You can't see what impact it is having on the overall perspective of your register. And probably most disconcerting for me as a risk professional is it's really difficult to manage the actions, because essentially an action within a risk spreadsheet is constrained by the amount of information you can enter into a column of data. And I would personally have 5 or 6 separate actions which were running, and I'd have to label it action A, action B, action C, and then who was the ownership of that action, and what status was that action in, and what life cycle was that action in. It just doesn't fit neatly into a regular risk register as a spreadsheet. There are other problems as well. I find that the data generally in an Excel spreadsheet will be static, and it will probably be deterministic as well. Namely, you have fixed values, or if you have a 3-point estimation on a piece of data, then you may well be doing a calculation, some sort of Pareto calculation as to what that value is. But it's deterministic. It doesn't really give you a full probabilistic approach to the information that you're using. There's generally minimal intelligence in your spreadsheet. You would use some formulas, but they're not particularly sophisticated in how they can derive value and information from the data that you're placing into the spreadsheet. They've got limited reporting capability. Now, I know some people have really successfully created the odd chart which comes out of a spreadsheet risk register. But overall, the reporting capability within spreadsheets and Excels is limited, and it's also quite tricky for people to create. So generating a new chart, generating a report of some description, particularly when you're trying to communicate that to senior management, when they will be necessarily focusing on the quality of that output, is very limited what you can do in a spreadsheet. And then finally, and I've already mentioned it, it can be very much error prone. You can quite simply make a mistake by dragging and dropping a field within your Excel spreadsheet, by cutting and pasting, by deleting a column, by deleting a row, and that can really screw up the use of your spreadsheet as your risk register. Because once you've broken a link between formulas within a spreadsheet, it takes an awful lot of time and effort to recover back to a working situation. So errors introduced into spreadsheets was something which I always used to struggle with all the time. Now, not only is the register an issue in its own right, but the configuration of your risk tool using a spreadsheet is actually critical to the successful operation and use of your data in your risk management process. Now, some of the things which I've discovered in my experiences were initially using scoring systems and having a fixed scoring system such that your spreadsheet would normally use only one matrix of probability and impact to give you a score. And that might be well and good if you're working on a single project. But what happens when your customer says, I want you to be using a specific customer scoring mechanism? Or what happens if you're using a portfolio mechanism and you want to see how your project aggregates across that portfolio scoring mechanism? You're very much fixed and limited to what you can do with a spreadsheet. You're also fixed by the limitations of how you've defined your likelihoods and your impacts for your particular project. And invariably, you will find that $1 million project will have different descriptions of its impacts from $1 billion project. Simply one does not compare to the other. And so trying to use one spreadsheet to apply against a range of different size projects will give you errors and introduce difficulties, which invariably, if it's a template or if it's a spreadsheet, the risk person will go in and they will modify it and change it, and again potentially introduce those errors. Sometimes you need some commonality across your organization such that you can compare like for like. And the trouble with spreadsheets is they become modified, they become changed, and they can't be used to compare like for like. So if you're trying to compare a scoring mechanism in one project to a scoring mechanism in another project, or you're trying to compare dollars to euros, it doesn't have the same read across, and spreadsheets will not make the life easy for the person who needs to compile that information for senior management digestion. And I know from personal experience, I used to spend a long time aggregating multiple Excel spreadsheets from different projects into a succinct monthly report. And I think, frankly, you've got much better things to do with your time than just trying to knife and fork information into a report. My second point here, it's almost impossible to aggregate those projects and portfolios and programs together. And the title of this part of the presentation was about moving beyond single spreadsheets and single project views and looking at your organization as a program or a portfolio of projects. And hopefully the tool, which we'll discuss in a minute, will show you how that's achieved. So there's some of the technical issues with it, but also you have issues with maintaining things like version control. If you're emailing around a template or an Excel worksheet, people are going to be making changes to it. They might make changes in the formula. If you're using a SharePoint, and I've tried that as an experiment, people make updates and they fork it such that the data is held in different versions. And again, trying to aggregate that information to get a consistent and concise view of where your risk exposure is as an organization is very difficult to do. And they're too easy to break. You can really get stuck by making an error in your spreadsheet, and you're very much beholden to the person who designed it. Only they really understand the formulas, only they can really fix a problem. And too many times I personally have been called in to try to help a project team who have got a broken risk register. And yeah, because I do have expertise in Excel, I can go in there and I can attempt to reverse engineer, but it takes hours and hours of effort. So there's some of the key technical issues with the use of the spreadsheet. But what I want to talk about next is one of the personal bugbears which I've found in my time managing risks, and that is the contingency problem. And for me, the contingency problem is a real symptom of the fact that spreadsheets are very deterministic. Now, essentially what I've seen in the past is people use very simple formula of they sum up the likelihoods multiplied by their impacts to give them a factored value, and that factored value is what they then determine to be the contingency required to be held on the project. Now, it's a formula, but I really strongly believe that it's a very bad habit to be in, and for these particular reasons. Yeah, it's simplistic. The idea that you can have a factored value, that you can say take a probability of 10% and an impact of £1 million, and you can times those two together and say, okay, I've got £100,000 factored risk here, is simplistic. And whilst it appeals to maybe the accountancy department who are looking for single deterministic values, it actually doesn't have any bearing on the reality of the world, because whilst you might have a 10% likelihood of that risk occurring, if it does occur, then there's a chance that you'll have £1 million impact. So saying a 10% of £1 million impact doesn't actually give you the true picture. Probably more dangerous, it leads to really bad behaviours within the organisation. Namely, you've set your contingency value to that deterministic value on your spreadsheet, and then weeks or months later, you discover you've got new risks which are emerging and you've identified, and you need to shoehorn those into your existing template and Excel spreadsheet without changing the agreed contingency budget. And people are going to be reluctant to go and argue for an increase in their budget if it's been determined deterministically. So what you see is people will fudge the numbers. They will squeeze in these new risks into their existing risk register by changing the likelihoods and the impacts of the existing risks so that it doesn't affect the bottom line number. And that's a terrible behavior, because essentially you're no longer using an accurate understanding of where you stand on your risks. And finally, there's the real subtlety of these low likelihood, high impact risks. So the 1 or 2% likelihood that £1 million risk will occur. Now that would be equated to a £10,000 factored risk on your spreadsheet and essentially ignored because it becomes a low value figure. However, that 1% does occur, you've suddenly got £1 million impact, and you wouldn't be able to determine that or see it readily from a table in an Excel sheet. So they're personally my real bugbears as to why using spreadsheets is a really bad idea to manage contingency values. So if we were going to design a new tool that addressed some of those key failings and shortcomings of a spreadsheet, how would we go about it? And what types of requirements would we want to build the tool around? So the first thing which we really did when we looked at making Safran Risk Manager is we looked at the existing requirements for a risk process. And one of the things which we've done is to map a risk process against some standard standards. There you go, that's a tautology for you. Yeah, we looked at the ISO 31000 methodology, which I personally work quite heavily with, but we also looked against the PMI, body of knowledge. And in that, we questioned ourselves, what is it that the risk management process needs to be able to deliver in order for us to achieve the outcome? So the first thing we said was, we need to be able to contextualize what our projects are and what is it that is at risk should the risk materialize on the project. So contextualization is a key element to it. Our next question is, what are those individual risks? So this is a risk identification step. Having identified what the risks are, we then need to analyze them and ask ourselves, how likely and how impactful are these risks should they occur? That then enables us to start putting things into priority. And with a priority, we can start evaluating what it is that is important to us. And then we can start asking the question, so what? So now that we know what's important, what can we actually do? And for me as a risk professional, it's only at this point does risk management start adding any value whatsoever. When you start identifying what it is that you can get people to do to start modifying the uncertainties and achieving better performance in your cost and your scheduled delivery on your project. So having understood what it is we're going to be able to do, we need to understand how much money we need. So this is the questions around those contingencies. How much money do we need to be sure that we're going to achieve our outturns? How much money do we need to invest in our action and our mitigation strategies? In order to make all of this work within an organisational framework and context, we also need to ask, how successful are we achieving our strategies? Are we successfully mitigating our threats? Are we successfully promoting and achieving our opportunities? Then we need to ask ourselves, what are we doing? Are we doing what we said we would do? Namely, we will review the projects. Are we aligned to our current processes? Are we achieving the outcomes that we're expecting our risk management process to achieve? And then that's from an individual project by project perspective, but we will take it to the wider picture. We can look at the portfolio and ask ourselves, what is my portfolio risk? How do my individual projects stack up against my exposure in my part of the organisation? And then finally, to wrap that all up together, we want to ask, how do we communicate this? And communicating to stakeholders, which includes our internal management and decision makers, to our external customers, and also to our work package and project management leaders who are actually at the sharp end making the actions happen. How do we communicate so that it's consistent and complete across the entire breadth of the organization? So if we could encapsulate all of those aspects into a single tool, I think we've got a big tick in the box of satisfying the requirement of a risk professional. But of course, when you build a tool like this, we don't only aim it at the risk professional, but rather we want to aim it to a much wider project audience. And so this is where turning to the user experience is a critical aspect of the design of a new tool. And my personal experience of using different tools over the last 15 and 20 years in my project management career is that tools have to be easy to use. There is no point in giving somebody a bamboozling array of different checkboxes and different things to fill in if it doesn't make any sense to them, if it doesn't seem to be of value add to those individuals. But there's a dilemma here, because it needs to be comprehensive enough to achieve the aims of the previous slide and meet all of those criteria. So we're looking for a comprehensive tool which is easy to use and is also flexible enough to be applicable to every type of project within your organization. So that's quite a big ask, and it's a challenge to try to make it as easy as possible whilst being as comprehensive as we can. It also has to be responsive and reliable. And I've sat in front of a computer screen before, and you click a button, it takes 20 or 30 seconds for the little whirly thing to occur and for the next page to move on. And that's just frustrating if you're entering 100 or 200 risks into a tool. It has to be instantaneous, it has to be responsive, and it has to be reliable. It needs to be there when you need it, and it needs to do what you expect it to do every time. One of the key factors of making risk management work and embed it across a project is everybody within the project team has to be able to actually easily access it and make use of it when they need to make use of it, such that creating new risks is a simple task for anybody within their project to do so. We also need to be able to provide useful information from that data, and it's about information to help decision makers, and find decision makers rely on very much the type and quality of the information that they're given, such that, and I've said it before, we can undertake action, because without action, the risk management process doesn't have any value whatsoever. So how do we take that to our organization and enable the decision makers to make the decision to invest in such a tool? Well, first of all, we've got to demonstrate that it's cost effective. Cost effectiveness comes in several ways. It's not only the price of the tool, but it's also how quickly it takes for people to get to learn how to use it, how quick and it is to start running and start working and becoming valuable within the project team, and also how much effort is required in setting it up and getting consultancy in to handhold the development and process. So that's the bottom line in terms of the finances, but it also must ensure that it fits to your organization's existing process, because you wouldn't want to purchase a tool which then drives you down a different philosophy and risk management approach than you've done before. So it needs to align to your existing approaches, whilst also giving you the necessary levels of security that you may require from the tool. And that includes project-to-project security, as well as individual access to certain pieces of information within projects. It must come with a high level of customer support, because you need to know that somebody's going to be at the end of the phone if something is not working for you. And you must be able to budget easily for its ongoing cost and maintenance. So this is the types of things that the management are thinking about. And then the final point here is, when you try it, you want to see it works for an individual project or into a small business group, but then you want it to be scalable, and you want to be able to scale it across to a national or a multinational organization without too much difficulty. So they're all the requirements. So those 3 requirements, the technical for the risk manager, the user experience, and your organizational requirements all require a tool. So I said to myself, there has to be a better way of doing this than just using Excel spreadsheets. So a potted history, in September of 2018, I presented my initial ideas to Safran. We had the first design concepts drawn up by 2019. We went to beta testing, which was a really worthwhile experience. And I'm sure some of the people on the call here were part of my beta testers. And then we launched our first part of the product, the MVP design, in March 2021. And now, and that tool is now Safran Risk Manager, as has been previously talked about. And Safran Risk Manager has got lots of features. It's original in its user-friendly design. I'm going to whiz through these because I'm conscious of the time, but we've made it super simple to enter new data into it. There's workflows which handhold you through the approval process and the data entry process, so you can't really make mistakes in creating new data for it. It's a web-based technology, so you can use it on your mobile phone, on your laptop, on your tablet, out and about, wherever. And it means it's accessible to everybody across your team. You can be configured to meet all your individual business requirements. But that's really the simple data in. The real value of our tool is the information that you can extract from it. And the key benefit of having the real-time dashboard. And the dashboard is pre-configured, so there's no need for you to be creating any new reports or forms. It's instantaneously there available for you. We've got a suite of reports, and that's growing all the time based on the customer feedback. And as customers ask for us to create a new report, we can do. It uses both a combination of qualitative and quantitative information and data to give you analysis, so you can see how many risks you've got, what their qualitative impacts are, and also what their quantitative outputs are likely to be. And this harks back to my point about the low likelihood, high impact risks, which would be lost in the noise of a regular qualitative risk register. But when you look at it as a quantitative, and we run 1,000 iterations in a Monte Carlo analysis, you can really see the long tail of one of those low likelihood, high impact risks. My other big bugbear, as previously mentioned, was the contingency budgeting. And what we've done, we've separated the risk registered quantitative values from the quantitative analysis of exposure. So you can start determining the appropriate contingency value and make decisions and not be driven by deterministic values on contingency budget. You can report on a single project, or, as spoken earlier, you can look at aggregating multiple projects, either within your dashboard or at the portfolio view, so that you can simply and quickly create the reports for your senior risk management team, so they can understand their overall changes in their risks and the exposures that they've got across their entire portfolio, without having to do any knifing and forking of data together. I've also mentioned the only benefit of risk management is to be action orientated, and we can look at actions as both being preventative and protective. We've got unlimited numbers of actions which can be applied to both source and impact. They're easy to maintain, and they have their own life cycle, so you can monitor who is responsible, how well they're succeeding, whether or not they need support. And you can have action reports, so you can quickly see which actions are most applicable to any individual within that organization, and you can alert them by having email alerts so that they understand what risks and what actions they need to be undertaken. Finally, the management, it's an inexpensive licensing options, and we'll talk about that if you come to us. We've got world-class customer support from a world-class company. There are minimal training costs, and there's no expensive consultation fees. It literally is, you unpack it after a small piece of calibration and some training, you're up and running within a matter of hours. We're using the tool aligned to your current and existing risk management processes. Plus, it's scalable because it's web-based, either as a SaaS or an on-prem, and the APIs can be integrated with existing tools such as Power BI. And of course, it works seamlessly with Safran Risk. So if you're already a Safran Risk user, you can use Safran Risk Manager to create the one single source of truth, manage all of those actions, and still do your comprehensive cost and schedule risk analysis. So we've managed to successfully sell it around the world. And if anybody's interested in seeing more of how the tool itself actually works, we've got a video, which is our introduction video, which is available to you from the Safran Risk Manager page. And I really welcome you to take a look at that video and see just how well and how easy it is for the Safran Risk Manager to give you the added value across your organization. Mark, that's the end of the presentation. I'm happy to take any questions if we've got any.
Well, we have, but pretty much your last 30 seconds has answered all of them. People were saying, where can I get a demo? I don't think you actually answered that bit, but I know the answer.
Come speak to us. Yeah, we're very welcoming. Drop us a note. You know, you can talk to me directly. You can talk to any of our sales representatives. They will quite happily organise a demonstration for you, and I'll give you that demonstration.
Okay, thanks. And for the little link that's in the handout that Mark said takes you to that 5-minute video he just mentioned. And at that point, you also press the button that says, you know, request a demo, and Mark will organise that for you.